Hi everybody, this is James Saxinger, and welcome to my Special Project podcast. For today's topic, it's going to be a little bit more serious than usual, but we'll try to keep the levity up for most of the time. We're going to be talking about death and afterlife. Now, for a lot of people today, there's been a lot of sadness and sorrow going around, and I feel ever since the COVID era came, and everyone was affected with a sickness that they couldn't really tell what it was, how it affected you, and what you would personally feel. It really brought a sense of paranoia and just overall disaster. There was a lot of people who we all loved and cared for that, passed due to that disease. And there are a lot of people still struggling with it today. It's definitely better. But I think with that in mind, I think a look at all these three texts have really opened my eyes as to what is coming for me in my personal life and what is coming later on after it's over as a Christian. So in discussing this topic of death and afterlife, we're going to look at three different texts. One is going to be Leaf by Niggle. Another is going to be The Welcome Table by Walker. And the third one will be How Much Land Does a Man Need by Tolstoy. So in Leaf by Niggle by J.R.R. Tolkien, it can relate to the death and afterlife by Niggle's experience at the end of the story, where Niggle finally finds his tree that he had been painting the entire time. Yet he also finds his friend Parrish as well, trying to work in a field and not knowing what he was doing. I believe this relates to the idea of the afterlife, where it's some form of purgatory, where J.R.R. Tolkien was a Catholic himself, and maybe this was his way of describing what purgatory actually looked like. So, in the story where Niggle had passed due to sickness and because he had worked so much, and then as he passed, he had to wait into purgatory in order to move closer to God, and that's his journey at the end of the story there. Here's the description of what Niggle went to do after he left Parrish to wait for his wife. He was going to learn about sheep and the high pasturages and look at a wider sky and walk ever further and further towards the mountains, always uphill. Beyond that, I cannot guess what became of him. Even little Niggle in his old home could glimpse the mountains far away, and they got into the borders of his picture. But what they are really like and what lies beyond them, only those can say who have climbed them. I think through this quote that it shows that Niggle was pursuing onward towards a totally different dimension that he was living in when he was painting the picture at first. I think this is Tolkien's way of saying that this is our journey towards God. As mountains reach higher, we also try to reach to the heavens in order to reach God. This is Tolkien's message in order to journey along with God towards that destination of heaven. So, not in the same vein as Leaf by Niggle, but similar in our journey with God himself is one of the other texts I'm referring to is The Welcome Table by Walker. So in this text, it describes a woman's last moments as she tries to, be with God and before she inevitably passes on. And the place where she goes to get closer immediately throws her out because she is not welcome there. Here's a very vivid description that Walker gives of when she was kicked out of the church. Under the old woman's arms, they raised their fists, flexed their muscular shoulders, and out she flew through the door, back under the cold blue sky. This done, the wise folded their healthy arms across the trim middles and felt at once justified and scornful. But none of them said so, for none of them ever spoke of this incident again. Inside the church, it was warmer. They sang, they prayed. The protection and promise of God's impartial love grew more, not less desirable, as the sermon gathered fury and lashed itself out above their penitent heads. I think this is a fear that we all have in our death, that, well, when we die, that no one would come to our funeral, that no one would remember that we are gone, just like they threw out the old lady here. However, in our Christian journey, I believe that the remembrance is not the important part. It's that we get to finally commune with our Lord, who created us and will remember us forever. And in the end of the story, that's what she goes through. And in that death, where she was treated differently in her earthly life and looked down upon, she was able to walk beside Jesus, the creator of all, without being frowned upon or just looked as something different. Okay, in our last text, we're going to discuss How Much Land Can a Man Have by Leo Tolstoy. And in the story, it's all about property. The main character keeps striving after more and more property until it ultimately becomes the end of him. Here's what the text has to say about it. Though afraid of death, he could not stop. After having run all the way that they will call me a fool if I stop now, thought he. And he ran on and drew near and heard the Bashkirs yelling and shouting to him, and their cries inflamed his heart still more. He gathered his last strength and ran on. He was so influenced by the people on top of the hill that he didn't care nor have any thought of his family back home that he left in order to gain the land for. So, all in all, with the text of these three authors, we can see that death is freeing in both from restrictions of the world and how you're looked upon, or you're able to journey farther than you can before and leave by Niggle, or also it frees you of your possessions and your earthly binds, as in Tolstoy's work. So, as Christians ourselves, we shouldn't just prepare for our death, as most humans do. We should look forward to it and being able to commune with our God and being the true nature of what God wanted us to be when we walk with him in the Garden of Eden. So, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast, y'all. Have a good one.